So, I know you mentioned you're a big fan of 80s
Oh,
slashers.
yeah, totally.
So we thought we'd take a deep dive into a cult classic that has kind of a unique twist.
Yeah.
Um, we're talking about Sorority House Massacre from 1986. And we'll be drawing on some analyses of the film
Okay.
to kind of uncover what makes it tick and why it still resonates with people all these decades later.
Awesome. Yeah. I think one of the most fascinating things about this movie is how it takes those familiar slasher tropes.
Right.
You know, the creepy killer,
Mm.
unsuspecting victims,
Yeah.
isolated location, and then it kind of adds this whole other layer,
Okay.
psychological torment through the main character, Beth.
All right. So let's unpack this. The setup seems pretty typical at first, right?
Yeah.
We have Beth. She's our protagonist.
Right.
And she ends up staying at a sorority house.
Mm-hmm.
So far, that sounds like a typical college weekend, right?
Well, not quite.
Good.
This house has a dark past.
Oh, okay.
It was actually the site of a pretty horrific massacre,
Oh,
orchestrated by, get this, Beth's own brother, Bobby.
what?
And guess what? He's just escaped from a mental institution and is headed straight back.
Oh, my gosh. That's
Yeah.
talk about family drama. So we have this escaped killer, right? He's
Yeah.
fixated on finishing what he started.
Mm.
That sounds very Halloween, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you definitely see that influence, especially in the relentless pursuit, the suspense that
Yeah.
keeps you right on the edge of your seat. But Sorority House Massacre takes it a step further, I think,
Wow.
with these really disturbing nightmares that Beth keeps having.
Uh-huh.
It turns out they're actually repressed memories of the original massacre.
Whoa, so she's been carrying this trauma around and doesn't even realize it.
Right. She has no idea.
No wonder she's a little on edge. So it's not just some random masked killer.
Right.
It's like this deeply disturbing personal connection between Beth and Bobby,
Exactly.
her own brother.
Yeah.
That is so messed up.
Yeah. And here's where things get even more interesting. Remember those nightmares, those visions?
Yeah.
Well, they might be more than just flashbacks.
What do you mean?
Well, there are hints that there's something much deeper going on, like a psychic link between Beth and Bobby.
Whoa, hold on. A psychic connection.
Yeah.
That adds a whole other dimension to the horror. So we're not just dealing with a physical threat from Bobby,
No.
but also these psychological and emotional scars that Beth is carrying around.
Yeah. It really makes you think about the impact of repressed trauma and how it can manifest in really unexpected ways.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So, I mean, the film's aesthetic seems like it would definitely add to that creepiness, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All those dimly lit hallways, shadowy figures lurking in the background, and those classic 80s jump scares. It all creates a really unsettling atmosphere.
Yeah, and that visual style really comes from the director, Carol Frank.
Okay.
She'd actually worked with Roger Corman,
Uh-huh.
who, as you might know, was known for his low-budget filmmaking.
Right. Yeah, that explains the kind of gritty, almost DIY feel of it.
Exactly.
It's not polished.
No,
But that rawness actually kind of works to the film's advantage.
I agree.
It feels more real, more visceral.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to point out that Carol Frank,
Yeah.
you know, she's a female director
Yeah.
working in a genre that, especially back then in the 80s, was very much dominated by men.
Oh, for sure.
And this could have led to, you know, some different choices in terms of how the female characters are portrayed.
That's a great point. I mean, they're not just helpless victims. No.
Right.
There's a sense of strength and camaraderie, especially in how they kind of rally around Beth as things start to go haywire.
Exactly. And I think it's refreshing to see that even within the confines of this slasher genre, you know, Frank was able to inject some nuance into these female characters. They have agency.
Mm-hmm.
They make choices.
Yeah.
They fight back.
Yeah, and you can really see that with Angela O'Neill's performance as Beth.
Oh, absolutely.
She captures that mix of vulnerability and strength perfectly, you know, as she confronts this horrifying past that's coming back to haunt her.
Yeah, it's a very compelling performance. It
Mm.
really anchors the film's emotional core.
Yeah. And then you have Bobby, who's played as this silent, almost supernatural force like
Right.
Michael Myers, but with, I mean, even less of a backstory or motivation.
Yeah.
It's interesting, that lack of backstory for Bobby. Do you think it makes him more terrifying because he's unpredictable?
That's a great question.
Or is it a missed opportunity to make him a more complex, fleshed-out villain?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something that I think has sparked a lot of debate among horror fans.
Yeah.
Some people argue that ambiguity, that not knowing why he does what he does, it
Yeah.
makes him more unsettling.
Right.
This kind of pure embodiment of evil.
Right.
Others feel that, giving him a little bit of a backstory or a hint of motivation would have made him a more memorable antagonist.
It's like you don't know if he's going to pop out from behind the door or just stand there menacingly.
Right. Exactly. You just don't know. It's really effective.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost like the film is messing with our expectations,
Right.
We're so used to having everything explained to us, all nice and neat.
Especially in horror movies.
Right. But Sorority House Massacre kind of leaves us hanging with all these unanswered questions about Bobby.
Yeah, it does.
It's almost as if he's just pure evil, like a force of nature.
Yeah, I like that, a force of nature. And speaking of messing with expectations,
Yeah.
let's talk about those sorority sisters for a sec.
Okay.
I mean, they're not just your typical, helpless slasher victims, are they?
No, definitely not. They've
Yeah.
got a surprising amount of camaraderie.
Yeah.
And they're not all just running around screaming and making dumb decisions.
Exactly, yeah. They support each other,
Hmm.
and they show a real sense of strength, especially when things start to get, really crazy.
Oh, for sure.
What do you think? Does this female perspective from Carl Frank, the director, help elevate the film beyond just your average slasher flick?
I think it definitely adds a layer of complexity
Yeah.
that you just don't see very often in these kinds of movies.
Right.
It makes the characters feel more real, more relatable.
Yeah.
You get the sense that they actually have lives outside of being potential victims.
Right, exactly. And it's not just their relationships with each other, but you see it in how they interact with Beth, too.
Yeah.
They believe her,
Yeah.
they rally around her, and they actually help her fight back.
Right. And that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Given that the director was a woman.
Yeah.
It's a fresh perspective, especially for a genre that's typically dominated by male directors.
Yeah.
And speaking of bringing something fresh to the genre,
Yeah.
Sorority House Massacre isn't like super widely recognized
Right.
like some other slasher films from that era,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely gained a pretty devoted following over the years.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because, it offers something a little different.
Okay.
It takes those classic elements,
Yeah.
the masked killer, the sorority house setting, the whole thing, but then it kind of blends them with that psychological depth we were talking about.
Right.
And that supernatural twist with the psychic connection.
Yeah.
It's not just a rehash of the same old slasher tropes.
Right. You get the suspense and the gore and that eerie atmosphere.
Yeah,
But then there's that added layer of the psychic link, which really sets it apart.
it does.
It's a combination that you don't forget easily.
Yeah. And, for those who really appreciate that, low-budget filmmaking, Sorority House Massacre is a real gem. You can see the creativity, the resourcefulness that went into making something memorable, even with, obvious limitations.
It's almost like those limitations became a stylistic choice,
It's sick.
The graininess of the film,
Uh-huh.
the minimal sets, even some of the, acting.
Yeah.
It all comes together to create this unique, almost dreamlike quality.
I agree.
It's a real testament to Carol Frank's vision as a director,
Yeah.
She took what she had, those constraints, and turned them into an asset.
Exactly.
It has this really gritty, almost underground feel to it,
Yeah.
which I think just, enhances the horror,
I agree.
And it shows that you don't need a huge budget to make a great horror movie.
No, not at all.
Sometimes it's about the ideas, the atmosphere,
Yeah.
and the talent that shines through,
Yeah.
Despite those limitations. It's a film that really gets under your skin.
Right.
It stays with you,
Mm.
creates this sense of unease that doesn't go away, even after the credits roll.
Right. And that's something that a lot of those big budget horror movies with all the fancy CGI and special effects often fail to do.
That's so true. So for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
why should they care about a low-budget slasher film from, almost 40 years ago?
Well, for one, I think it's a good reminder that horror, it can be more than just jump scares and gore.
Right.
It can be a way to explore deeper themes, to confront our fears and to really challenge our perceptions of, what's real and what's not.
Right. And Sorority House Massacre does exactly that.
Yeah.
It makes you think about, the nature of trauma,
Yeah.
the power of memory, and that blurred line between, reality and nightmare.
Absolutely. And it manages to do all of this while still delivering those, satisfying slasher elements that, we all love.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even within a genre that's been done so many times,
Yeah.
there's always room for innovation
Yeah,
and unique voices
absolutely.
to emerge and tell their stories. And Sorority House Massacre is definitely a testament to that.
It is.
So if you're looking for a horror film that's going to challenge you and stay with you long after you've seen it, Sorority House Massacre is definitely worth checking out. You won't be disappointed.
Well, you might be if you're expecting, some big budget CGI extravaganza,
Right.
But if you're a fan of old school horror
Right.
with a bit of psychological depth and a touch of the supernatural,
Yeah.
this one's definitely for you. It's a reminder that, real horror doesn't need fancy effects
Mm-hmm.
to be effective,
Yeah.
It's about tapping into our primal fears,
Right.
our anxieties, the things that go bump in the night.
And Sorority House Massacre does that, like, perfectly. It gets under your skin,
Yeah.
stays with you, and it might make you think twice about spending the night in a sorority house.
Or any house, for that matter.
Yeah, that's true. Any house at all. It's like it lets us kind of explore those dark corners of our minds
Yeah.
without actually having to, put ourselves in danger.
Right, right.
And Sorority House Massacre, it just does a fantastic job of creating that unsettling feeling that sticks with you.
It does.
Even after the movie's over. It's a film that, it kind of encourages us to think about what really scares us,
Oh, yeah.
what gets under our skin. And it's not always like the monster jumping out from behind the door, right?
Right, yeah. Sometimes it's something much deeper.
Yeah.
Something, inside of us. The potential for violence, for chaos.
Yeah.
That exists even in, the most ordinary person.
Right. And that brings us back to Bobby.
Yeah.
And that whole question about his backstory or the lack thereof.
Right, right.
We were talking about, does not knowing his motives make him more terrifying?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it, a missed opportunity to really develop his character?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Where do you land on that?
Well, it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And there's not really a simple answer.
Yeah.
I think it depends on, what you're looking for in a horror villain.
Yeah.
Some people find the unknown absolutely terrifying.
Right.
That lack of motivation,
Yeah.
the pure, evil, that can be really unsettling.
Yeah, like he represents something primal, something
Yeah.
we can't really grasp.
Yeah.
Like a force of nature, like we were saying before.
Exactly, exactly. But then, sometimes knowing what makes a killer tick,
Yeah.
that can be even scarier when you
Yeah.
understand their backstory, their motivations, their thought process.
Yeah.
It almost makes them feel more real,
Yeah.
more human,
And that's terrifying because then you realize that kind of darkness could be anywhere,
Right.
even in someone we know.
Exactly. So with Bobby,
Yeah.
it's almost like the filmmakers are giving us this blank slate,
Yeah, that's a good point.
We can project our own fears onto him.
Oh, totally.
We can project our own fears onto him.
Oh, totally.
He becomes whatever scares us the most.
Yeah. That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's like a Rorschach test for horror fans.
Yeah, like it.
You see what you want to see.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Based on your own experiences and fears and all that.
Right.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Sorority House Massacre, let's throw that question out to you, our listener.
Absolutely.
What about you? If you were to watch this film,
Mm-hmm.
would you find Bobby's lack of backstory terrifying or frustrating? Would it add to the horror for you, or would it kind of detract from the experience?
Yeah, we want to know.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on, on anything that resonated with you about this film.
Yeah, what surprised you?
What surprised you?
Yeah.
What about that psychic connection between Beth and Bobby? Did that add another layer of depth to the horror?
Mm-hmm.
Or did it feel out of place?
Yeah, what about those sorority sisters?
Yeah, how about those sorority sisters?
Did their camaraderie, their strength
Yeah.
set them apart from your, typical slasher victims?
That's what makes these deep dives so fun for us.
Yeah.
It's not just about passively watching a movie.
Right.
It's about really engaging with the ideas,
Yeah.
the artistry, and the impact these films have on us,
Mm-hmm.
and on the horror genre as a whole.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's about starting a conversation, sharing our passion for horror.
So we encourage you to check out Sorority House Massacre, or maybe give it a rewatch,
Yeah.
and let us know what you think.
Yeah, what questions did it raise for you?
Yeah, we'd love to hear your insights and interpretations.
Absolutely.
Until next time, happy viewing. And remember, keep the lights on and the door's locked.
Yeah, you never know when Bobby might be lurking nearby.
You never know.